Happy Sunday morning to all you VC people and other assorted people out there on YouTube. I'm back with another Rolling Stones album review. Yesterday I did their first album, so I guess it only makes sense to do their second album at this point. And at this point, early on, up and through to about 1967 or so, these things are kind of hard to keep track of. Gets a little complicated because just like the Beatles, just like a lot of other bands in the early 60s, the British and American albums differed, and there's some albums that didn't exist in Britain and vice versa because the American record companies had a tendency to squeeze more albums out uh, than they did in England. So this is certainly the case with this one. So we come to the Rolling Stones 12 by 5, and this is the band's second album, but it's their second album in America. It's not their second album in England. Their second album in England came out after this, same year though, and they're two different albums, even though they do have a few songs, 3 or 4 songs in common between the two, but they're largely different albums. So, like I said, it gets a little tough to keep track of things with that. But 12 by 5 came out October 17th, 1965, United States only. Went all the way up to number 3, so pretty good chart showing for a new band and their second album. The 12 by 5, there was a EP released in England. After the first album, the band released a couple of more singles, and they released an EP called 5 by 5. And what that means is that the EP, kind of strange because they usually have 4 songs, but that EP had 5 songs on it, and there are 5 Rolling Stones, so it meant 5 songs by 5 guys, or 5 songs by 5 Rolling Stones. So the American record company took all of the 5 by 5 songs except for one. They left off "If You Need Me" for some reason, and they put them on this album, and then they put some 45s and B-sides, a couple of 45s and B-sides that had been released that weren't on albums over in England, and then just some other extra songs that the band had recorded that were around. And so they came up with 12 by 5. So there's 12 songs on the album. Even though you get more songs, you don't get more Rolling Stones, so you still got 5 of those. So 12 songs by 5 guys, basically what that means. So here's my copy, and sadly this is not an original, but it is in mono, so it's nice. There's the back cover, liner notes by Andrew Oldham, and you can on the London label, nice thick vinyl, so good stuff. Anyway, so yeah, they stretched this out to a full album from an EP, the magic of American record companies back in the early 60s. We still have mainly covers on this album, just like the first album was. You get a little bit more. You get 3 songs written by Jagger Richards, and you get one Nanker Feld song. And like I referred to on the first album review, Nanker Felge was a pseudonym for songs that were written that were credited to the whole band. And they didn't do that for too long. They sort of abandoned that concept after 1965 or so. But there were, all told, about 15 Rolling Stone songs credited to Nanker Felge. Some of them have not been released officially. A lot of them were instrumentals. Some of them had lyrics. But the name means there was a guy named Jimmy Felge who, back before the band was famous, before when they were just poor and working, playing clubs and stuff and trying to make it, Brian and Keith and Mick shared an apartment together, and Jimmy Felge was another one of their apartment, the flatmates as they call it over in England, were a roommate. So, and Nanker is I guess just a Brian Jones word, sort of a slang word for making grotesque or pulling funny faces, making funny faces, which Brian liked to do apparently, and I guess the rest of the band did too. So he just put those together, and Nanker Felge was born as a way to credit instrumentals and other assorted songs that were credited to the whole band early on. So that's kind of what that was about. The funny thing about this album was that a lot of it was recorded in the United States and some in England, which you think the Beatles pretty much recorded all their stuff in England. I think there were a few things. Can't Buy Me Love, I believe, was recorded in France. I don't think the Beatles ever recorded anything in America as far as studio stuff. I'm almost positive. But the Rolling Stones did quite a bit of recording in America early on and quite a bit in England. So that's kind of interesting, or maybe not. I don't know. But so you got a nice cover. Again, portrait of the band. All their 60s albums, by and large, had good covers, I think. So what else? Let's get into the songs, I guess. And this is kind of that second album curse, or second album fall off, where it's not quite as good as their first album. Starts out pretty strong, but kind of runs out of gas a little bit on side two. But overall, pretty good album. And we will get into the songs, I guess, right now. Side one starts off with Around and Around, Chuck Berry song from 1958. And I'm thinking of all the covers the Rolling Stones did, I guess Chuck Berry's the one that they covered more than anybody. And kind of makes sense because Keith Richards always been a huge Berry fan, so maybe. But just really good vocal by Jagger. Guitar and piano stand out in the song. It's a hard rocking song for 1965. Compare it to Berry. Berry probably comes out ahead, but the Rolling Stones do a really good job too. So I'm going to give Around and Around, the Stones version, an 8. Next up is Confessing the Blues. This is another song that Chuck Berry did also. It's I think it was the flip side to Johnny B. Good, if I'm not mistaken, but don't hold me to that. Berry's version is better. There's also this song's been around for a long time. The B.B. King, Little Walter, some of those other blues guys did it throughout time, and most of those are better than the Stones. It's the Jagger's not the greatest singer in the world, but he's still good. But he can't compare to guys like that. But it's just pretty damn good blues song here. The guitar, the piano, harmonica. It's kind of strange because 1964. This is hardly pop music, and it's just funny to think. And I kind of talked about this in my first video, the first review of the first album. That is that a lot of these kids in America hearing blues probably for the first time through the Rolling Stones and the Animals and bands like that had just never paid attention or even knew about electric blues or Chicago blues or the old blues stuff, and so it was kind of brought to them by the Rolling Stones. So this is hardly pop radio 1964 65 type music, but it's damn good music, and they do a really good cover version of it, and I'm going to give it a 10. I like it a lot. I also said with the last review that white guys usually can't do the blues very well, but the Rolling Stones are an exception. Again, you're never going to mistake them for Robert Johnson. You're always going to know these are 4 white kids from England. But I think it's just that they had a true love of it early on, at least at this point in their career, and they put heart and soul into it. They don't respect it so much that they treat it like a museum piece. They just dive into it, kick it around, and have some fun, which is why someone like Eric Clapton or something that just treats it with too much awe and respect, and it comes off sterile and sort of dull compared to the real thing. But the Rolling Stones, they knew how to do it pretty well back in the day. So Confessing the Blues, really good one. Not a hit 45 material or radio pop hit, but just a good take on a blues song, and the Stones do right by it. So that gets a 10. Next up is Empty Heart. This is one of the only Nankerfeld credited song on the album here. Gonna give that a 9.5. I like it. It's part blues, part surf music sound to it. Kind of sounds like soundtrack music from one of those early 60s kind of cornball movies, Doris Day movie or something like that. Swinging little thing. There's some background vocals that are cool, mainly instrumental, but it's not the best song they ever did, but it's a fun one, and it's good enough to get a 9.5 from me on Empty Heart. Now we go to Time Is On My Side, which was, I guess someone will tell me maybe, but this was probably one of their first hits. There's two versions of this song, and the one on here is the one that starts with the organ intro rather than the guitar intro. It's the more rare of the two. You usually hear on the greatest hits albums, and this gets a lot of radio play around here on oldies radio stations. Still, you usually hear the guitar intro version. This one is, and it's a different take too. So this one's a little more laid back and sedate than the better known version. Uh, and that was got to number 6 in the U.S. as a 45. But yeah, it's a good one. I'm going to give it a 10. It's an interesting song because it was written back around 62 or 63 or so. The first version was done by a guy named, and I don't know how you say his name, Kai, so Kai or K, Winding or Winding. It was a trumpet player, jazz guy. I think he was trumpet, might have been trombone, but jazz guy. And that version is actually worth looking up on YouTube. It's pretty good. It's got "Time Is on My Side" is the only lyrics, and it's basically instrumental. Well, it's not actually. It's instrumental, and it's got backing singers, and those backing singers happen to be Dionne Warwick and her sister Dee Dee Warwick and Cissy Houston, who was the mother of Whitney Houston, of course. But no real lyrics other than just the title. But it's still a interesting take on the song, worth looking up on YouTube. The other version that came out in 1964 before the Rolling Stones version was Irma Thomas's version, which when her version came out, someone came along and added more lyrics. The lyrics that we know was the Rolling Stones version. Her version's really good too. The Rolling Stones version is good as well. They're all three good. I'm going to give "Time Is on My Side" a 10, even though it's one of those Stone songs that's been a little overplayed thanks to oldies radio that only plays like 2 or 3 songs from each artist other than the Beatles, and instead of playing a lot of other good songs that they have. But anyway, "Time Is on My Side" gets a 10. We move on to "Good Times, Bad Times." This is the first Jagger Richards pen composition on the album. Very bluesy song, a lot of harp. Hardly commercial song either, not really the hit single type song. They're still a little too imitative of their blues heroes at this point in their songwriting, but at the same time, it's a really good song. It's not one of the classic great Rolling Stone songs, but it's a really strong and really good song. I'm going to give it an 8. And they were learning the craft of songwriting at this point, and it's still a work in progress. But "Good Times, Bad Times" gets an 8, and that is, by the way, not the same song from the first Led Zeppelin album. Same title, 2 totally different songs. "It's All Over Now" is number 6. Great snide Jagger vocal, one of the first maybe classic Jagger vocals. I don't know, maybe I'm a King Bee from the first album, but this is sort of the Rolling Stones Jagger that we all came to know and scratch our heads about and love in spite of that fairly soon. This is a song written by Bobby Womack, who recorded it in 1964 with his band Bobby Womack and the Valentinos, which was came out in October, which is funny because the Rolling Stones come out with it just a few months later. And so it went, as far as the Rolling Stones single went to number 1 in the UK, was their first number 1 over there. It only went to number 26, in America. So just a down-home gut bucket soul song, the original take. And the Stones version is very good too. It's a great song. I give it a 10 on both versions, actually, Womack's and the Stones. And pretty risque for 1964 or 1965, I guess, is when this came out. But I don't know, the 45 might have come out in 64 with the Stones. I don't remember. I think 65. Anyway, pretty risque with half-assed games in the lyrics, and "She Gives Me My Breakfast in Bed" and stuff like that. But it got by the censors and got played, and it's a good song. It gets a 10. And with that, we go to side 2, and here things, some good stuff, but things go a little downhill. Starts off with 2120 South Michigan Avenue, another Nankerfelge song. This is the address refers to Chess Record Studio, the address of Chess Records in Chicago, which is where this song was recorded. Again, they recorded some of this in America, some in England, and they recorded actually at Chess Studios. It's a nice but pedestrian blues jam with all the well-worn tropes of the genre. Obvious that it's got a nice guitar solo partway through, but it's obvious that probably to them by this point, and to Andrew Oldham, their manager, that if they wanted to be proper rich, famous pop stars like the Beatles and other bands of the time, that they were going to have to start writing songs on their own and weren't going to be able to sustain with these covers of old blues songs and these written songs by themselves, but that sort of aped old blues songs. But it's a nice little blues jam. It's a bit pedestrian. I'm going to give 2120 South Michigan a 6. Next up is Under the Boardwalk, a song by the Drifters originally that the Drifters took to number 4. Not a very good cover. Jagger's pretty tepid take on the song. He strains at times to keep up with the vocal and falls short at times because he just can't really, whatever vocal talents he had, and he does have some, but he's not on par with the Drifters vocal wise, and it really adds nothing. It's just a unnecessary cover of a song that was done much better by the Drifters. It was a great song, the original, but the Rolling Stones take, it doesn't really add anything. Didn't really need to be. So I'm going to give that song a 4.3 by the Rolling Stones. If I was talking about the Drifters version, you'd be talking about a 9 or a 10. With the Rolling Stones, this is one of the covers that they shouldn't have bothered with. Third song, Congratulations. It's a Mick and Keith song. This is, I like this one. This is a good one. I'm going to give this a 9. It's kind of just a strolling, slightly countryish blues sort of trip or ballad type song. It's also a little bit popish overtones, which show things to come, signs of things to come. It's got some nice harmonies. It's not Satisfaction or Get Off My Cloud yet, but it's a pleasantly wonderful little song is Congratulations, and I always like that one. One of their good early takes, one of the good early songs that is, and so I'm going to give that a 9, like I said. Fourth song, another Mick and Keith song, Grown Up Wrong. Slide guitar in here, bluesy thing, but it also kind of points somewhat here and there to their mid-60s Baroque period sound, so that's kind of interesting. And another one that's not hit record material, but a good album cut all the same. Solid album cut, short and sweet. It gets an 8. It's a good one, Grown Up Wrong. Up next, number 5, If You Need Me. This was a song originally done by Wilson Pickett and shortly thereafter done by Solomon Burke, who had the bigger hit with it than Wilson Pickett did, and Wilson wasn't too happy about that, but that's another story. It's the Rolling Stones version. I'm going to give it a 5.5. It's not terrible, but there's just no way that Mick, or the Stones for that matter, but Mick especially vocally, he can't compete with Solomon Burke or Wilson Pickett. That's just ridiculous. And they both outsold Mick by miles on their takes of the song. So the Rolling Stones song, it's kind of lukewarm. It gets a 5.5. And the final song is Susie Q, which has been done by Everybody and Their Dog. So you've all heard that song, but originally done by Dale Hawkins back in 1957 with more of a rockabilly take on it, the original. The most famous one probably is, I would guess, Creedence Clearwater Revival's take on it later on in the 60s on their first album, I think, first or second album. The Rolling Stones version, again, it's okay. I give it a 5. It's just sort of superfluous, and they don't add anything to the Hawkins original, and nothing really special about it. So the album ends on a little bit of a bummer note. It's not bad, but a 5 or 6 about as high as I can go on that. So probably more of a 5, really. Overall, though, I think the album's, even though it sort of peters out on the second side, it's good enough to be a pretty solid album. I'm going to give it an 8 overall, and it does give lie to the thought by some that the Rolling Stones are one of those just the hits tap bands, because they did have, even on these early albums, there's a lot of good stuff in here to discover. They're not, up until say 66 or 67, their early albums are not the quality of say the Beatle albums, where all the songs by and large are great, even the, not just the hit singles but all the album tracks. So there are a lot of covers, filler, but there's also a lot of good stuff on these albums too, and a lot of stuff that never got much radio play. I don't know if it did in the 60s or not, but subsequently never did. And there's some great stuff to discover. And I also think that's important because I do, on YouTube, you'll see a lot of younger people that like older music, and they really like the Beatles, and they like some of the other bands, Pink Floyd or whatever, but you don't really hear the Rolling Stones brought up as much by that age group. It seems to me that you don't, as you used to 20 or whatever years ago. And I don't know if that's because, the Beatles ended when they were young, sort of the James Dean thing where he died when he was young. So James Dean in our minds is always going to be this 20-year-old kid, a giant and rebel without a cause. And the Rolling Stones, like Queen Elizabeth, apparently are never going to go away. And so younger kids, maybe the Rolling Stones are just these shriveled up old geriatric men that haven't made any music worth listening to in decades, and come around with these tours every year to wheeze through their old greatest hits like a Vegas residency review show or something. And the Beatles and a lot of these bands from the past are kind of frozen in youth, our picture of them. But I don't know, that's just a thought. But what I'm trying to say is that the Rolling Stones were a great band once upon a time, and up there, I'd put them like 4 or 5 of my favorite bands of all time. And there is a lot of stuff to discover, a lot more than just Satisfaction and Honky Tonk Woman and Brown Sugar and all those great songs. So these albums are worth checking out, and while they may not have the consistent quality of the Beatle early albums, they're both the first album is great. I can listen to it start to finish, and this one is mainly great. There's a couple of Under the Boardwalk and If You Need Me that are extra baggage, but yeah, good stuff. So that is 8 for that album, and we will be back with the band's second English album, which is next up in the list. So try to keep track of all this stuff. I'll be glad when we get to 67 and these albums start being the same on both sides of the ocean. Take care, everybody.